Hi there, welcome to Bitcoin Cash Wyckoff Technical Analysis session. If you're new to my sessions, here are the key takeaways you can expect. And let's start with the weekly chart now. So from the big picture, we're seeing Bitcoin Cash climbed last week to above the yellow key level of $530, but simply get rejected both last week and this week from the ceiling of the long-term playground zone at around $576. So that white line over there, this particular white line, was where this week's candlestick tested and then got rejected and pushed down to where it basically started. The open of the week. And then now we are retesting the yellow key level of $530. So looking from a big picture perspective, in terms of Wyckoff, we ask whether the climb last week would be another LPSY, and indeed it has been confirmed. So if I turn it to a line chart, it will be a lot clearer to you that we had another peak happened. Okay, there was a deep dive and then bounce up, but then another peak formed. So that's another LPSY. So the chance of getting towards an accumulation cycle, I'm still keeping it at a higher percentage, while the test, I wouldn't say is an upwards of the distribution only. It can just be a second test as well. So meaning it can still come to test the green key level of around 615. Okay? But then whether it can go further than the upwards peak back on the week of September 15th, that's a very big question mark because of this pink line over here. I shared a couple of times in the past session that there seems to be a declining trend of buying climaxes going on. If that really is the case, that we have already seen this cycle's peak on somewhere around 15th of September, then for another test that goes beyond this pink line, obviously if you're supporting Bitcoin Cash, it's something happy to see, because I did mention we want to see the price to, or the peaks to test the 700 level, okay, at least, in order to prove that Bitcoin Cash has long-term investment or speculative value, because that's where the April 2024 peak was, as well as these intermediate or like late stage distribution peaks were back in 2021. Nowhere in between. We all know like 2022 and 2023 was a prolonged accumulation period. So there was no distribution cycle, or at least no big ones like the one we have seen during those year and a half to 2 years time. So that's why I say at least we hope to see something like this at the 700 level. Best, of course, some people would think the 900 level, but that's very, very difficult. Even the 790, the blue key level, is a real challenge. So one step at a time, at least if it really comes out, breaks above this pink line, so to clear of the worry about a declining peak situation for Bitcoin Cash. Okay, so these pertain, the chances remains. And before getting to the into the daily chart to check the breakout timing, any near-term breakout timing, just to check the Bollinger Band counter squeeze. We are second week in terms of the definition of the indicator. So I always try to differentiate this. So this patch or this shade at the back started last week. But for my own consideration, I would consider that started in the week of October 6th. You see the purple lines are clearly getting close, very close to the orange, and you know that it's going to happen. So if you're new to this indicator, usually after a squeeze, a bigger price swing will happen. It doesn't tell us, the indicator doesn't tell us which side the price swing will happen first. Okay, sometimes the squeeze happen and then the price swing down. And sometimes when the squeeze happen, it swings up and just to get back down. Alright, multiple occasions over here. Alright, so that's what's the indicator telling us, that a squeeze is happening and bigger price move relative to the recent ones are going to happen. So let's get to the daily chart now while we are still on the indicator, just to quickly check whether the squeeze is also happening in the daily. But for daily, the swing may be smaller compared to what's going on for the weekly. And now the purple line on the channel top, they are basically together since 3-4 days back. And the bottom edge, if the price continues to trade narrow range, it can quickly come close to the orange in 2 to 3 days time. So a squeeze would happen as quickly as by the middle of this week. Okay? Enough for the Bollinger Band corner squeeze. Back to the Wyckoff in daily time frame. So even though the stages are similar or it's the same and the percentages have to align, this doesn't mean the same as the weekly time frame. Alright, because there can be intermediate fluctuations that does not reflect over here in the weekly, but in daily we see all these waves. So if what we have gone through over the past few days is just another LPSY, okay, then eventually this would come down to show us preliminary support and the selling climax. So last time it happened, it was somewhere around February this year. So the price came down to the level between the orange and the red, and eventually gone lower than that to set the selling climax, similar to the one we have back in July 2024. Okay, and selling climax is in the lowest point. Both September 2024 and April this year show us a spring as well, meaning a lower test point compared to the selling climax. This time we haven't seen this yet. We're still in a distribution cycle. So essentially there can still be another wave up before it comes down. Or maybe multiple waves as well if it decides to trade sideways. The big guys decide to trade sideways, much like what happened in July all the way till October. That can happen as well. However, if we look at these activities over here, previously we said this downtrend may have a breakout opportunity before November 10th, and it already happened like on last Sunday. So if this is the new rate of decline, so there are, just to be clear, there are at least two scenarios playing out over here. I want to simplify it. I don't want to overcomplicate this for you. This was our original channel box, the downtrend. Okay, that started sometime near mid-September. And now, one thing we can do is either adjust this box. Let me duplicate this so we still have the old one. And what I'm going to show you is the rate of decline has changed. So you see the slope is different between the two boxes, okay? Not a whole lot different, just slightly. So we are going through a more gradual decline compared to the original projection. So if this is really the case, what's going to happen by November 18th, so sometime before November 18th from now, if the price continues to trade within this triangle, that's another decision point. So if it breaks below the yellow support line, which provided support for the past 4 days, then that means this new downtrend is going to continue, and the previous ceiling of this older trend box, let me change it to a darker blue so we can differentiate. So the previous ceiling would become a support line if the price really trades downwards below the yellow key level of 530. If it doesn't, if it goes up to challenge the ceiling of the long-term playground on this white line over here around $576, it can trade sideways or go further to challenge the green, like I mentioned in the beginning. So that's a totally different story compared to continuing along the downtrend. So that means it's confirming that this downtrend is no longer valid. Alright, so in the next 2.5 weeks, that's going to be very key. But looking at the volume over here, it caused me to believe that it's going to stay within the box. Reason, look at these red bars and look at these wicks over here. Okay, I'm just cautious that if you're watching on mobile, especially the vertical feed, I need to enlarge this for you because it's looking pretty small. Okay, hope it's clearer for you. And hey Byron, yeah, thank you for your support. Yeah, so here, that these wicks that we're talking about means very strong selling from those area, and it's not just one day. You see over there, at least 5 days if I do not count this like breakout bar over here. 5 consecutive days of pretty strong selling from the white line. Okay, if there is sufficient support, we shouldn't see these kind of things. We probably will see something like this. This is something positive, so quite a bit of buying from below the yellow, but then still being suppressed over there. So it's a near-term resistant line that's developed by the activities over there. These 3 days, October 27th all the way to 29th, kind of showed a position where the bulls and the bears agreed on those 3 days that, at least for the short term, if no like new news coming out, that's where they would like to stay at. But then eventually those selling happened, and then we're in the current situation where the people are seeking direction before the price moves further. However, when we get across the timeline into this triangle, that's why I said I'm more inclined to think it's probably going to break the yellow because of all these going on. If there's sufficient support, I will see longer wicks from the bottom and then a candlestick here. Then that's where I would incline to think there's sufficient force to break outside of the downward channel. Alright? And also, if you're new to these channel boxes concept, it's normal to see the price to test the 2 edges of these boxes, and also one more line, the center line of the box. So you see sometimes these peaks stop somewhere near those center line. So if I change it to a line chart, you can clearly see where the peaks kind of bounces off, but they're not the lows of those days. So it's better to look at candlestick charts to see where those bounces happen. Alright, just to extend this a little bit. Yep, thanks Byron. So, Bitcoin Cash, be careful because of these red bars selling activities, that the downside risk is still high, even though we have changed course towards a less steep decline. So just to recap from looking at the big picture, remember there are multiple challenges for Bitcoin Cash. we have this white line, which is the long-term playground zone for Bitcoin Cash. You see 70-80% of the time since 2017 that Bitcoin Cash has been trading within this white box. That's the very first resistance if Bitcoin Cash has to go up. And then the second is the 615 green level, where the buying climax and upthrust ended up around for the current distribution cycle that happened in summer. And eventually, also this climax back in end of 2024 as well. So multiple reference points that's going to make 615 a big challenge for Bitcoin Cash. The wishful thinking for us is to see the 700 mark. Alright, so if this lake is really developing into an uptrend, which I have clearly forgotten to mention when we were in the daily chart. So assuming that really is the case, if this is really going to break above and forms an uptrend, alright, assuming that this is going to happen, that breaks even outside of this light blue box that we just talked about, the new adjusted downward channel. If that's the case, then that's when it's got a chance to come challenge the higher levels, or at least the green or even the light blue. But this is yet to be confirmed. Alright, so don't think this white box is confirmed yet. I already mentioned it's key for the next 10 to 15 days for this to confirm whether it's going to break above the blue box. So interesting thing is, if this white box is really the case, then by next Saturday, so in just 6 days time, if the price really trades above this white bottom edge, then there is really a chance going there. But already mentioned a lot of reasons, the volume and all that, it's going to be a challenge. But again, there's still 20% chance, not that it won't happen. So luckily I remember to tell you the box. So thanks for joining me today. Hope this gives you a clearer context on both the upside and the downside risk. See you in the next session.